hope everybody had a good night's rest and that we're ready to delve into our subject today. As our brother said, this subject is one that we don't talk about a lot in the pulpit, and maybe we don't talk a lot about it in our church settings. But nevertheless, it is this topic of the top two topics today, pornography and betrayal, are the top two topics or issues that our brethren bring to me. I do counseling through Leaving the Pit Behind, and we've got 14 Christian counselors that work with us across the country. And by Christian, I mean as we define that. And this is the topic. When it comes down to marital counseling, this is the topic. We may talk about conflicts on the surface, but ultimately when we dig down into it, pornography and betrayal are often at the core. So, a very serious problem that we're dealing with this morning. Okay. I call this a pandemic. That word we weren't using when COVID hit, but we use it a lot now. And pandemic means it's worldwide. It filters out into all areas of our society. It is in our culture, and it is also, unfortunately, in our congregations. So we're going to talk about that this morning. Where'd you learn the facts of life? When I ask people that question, what they often tell me is that they learned it either out of some health class, or they may have had a slight chat with parents, or they learned it in the shower room, or more often than not in our day and time, they'll tell me they found out about this by surfing the web. And what I've concluded is that the devil has become the tutor on sexual things and has established, unfortunately, a culture that feeds off of itself and that degrades and diminishes from the way God created us. But when a Barna study was done, actually over in Billy Graham country, not far from here, and it was done by the Barna group, and what they concluded from fundamentalists, and they included people like us in that group, is that 63% of church-going men, regular church-going men, viewed pornography and self-stimulated at least once or twice a week. Church people. Now that was a startling statement, but what the study also showed is 42% of women have issues with pornographic types of things. The difference in the two is that the men go to the picture sites and the women tend to go to the relationship sites. Finding somebody online, talking dirty with them, or texting or communicating dirty with them online. And so what used to be like the Harlequin romances, and more recently, was it 50 Shades of Grey? And things like that, the stimulating kinds of stuff, that's what the women are typically going to. That's changing a little bit with people not knowing what their gender is, and so those numbers are getting a little different now, not much different. But whatever that number is, that's an alarming percentage of people that are claiming that they have a connection with the Lord, whether we would agree with that or not. And yet, at the same time, they've got their foot in a whole different world. I don't know what the numbers are amongst us, but I do know that well over 50% of the people that come to me with different problems, and well over 50% of the people that come to me, the church members, this is the issue. This is the core issue. It's one that people don't talk about. It's something that is usually done in secret, but it's found out as someone's checking a website, or we see secretive kinds of behavior. Someone's going into history, and all of a sudden, here it is. And we'll talk about betrayal in the next hour. But it's a serious problem, and it's destroying marriages. And we're going to talk about why in this. So where do we learn about the facts of life? Everything God made is good. God made us as male and female. He gave us our sexuality. And God said that's good. It's not something dirty or nasty or something to be hidden, something that we do our spirituality all in home or in church, but yet we go in the bedroom and have our sexuality. That's not that. Sexuality and spirituality are intricately linked, as we will point out later in this lesson. Many people learn from the world. Let's look at God's attitude, God's regulations on sexual kinds of things. And I'm going to give you a quick overview. I say quick because when I was asked to expound on this in one place, they said, take all the time you want. And I said, I don't know about that. And they said, just keep going. And I said, all right. And they didn't stop me. And we went for an hour and a half. The Bible has a lot. They wanted me to go from Genesis to Revelation on everything the Bible said about sex. And that took a while. And I was flying fast. Anyway, but here's the short version. Okay. In the Old Testament, we see that God condemns incest. And I'm not going to read these verses. They're here. You can have these PowerPoints, but there's 18 verses here in Leviticus, in the Levitical law, about incest. That is, family members being sexual together. That's on the rise amongst us too. And it's even more on the rise with blended families that I don't know quite go into that incest because there's not a blood tie with some, but it is very much there. A lot of the pornography that is out there, it is accessed by father-daughter, mother-son kinds of captions that people feed off of that. What starts on the screen does not end on the screen. It comes out into real life. If the fantasy happens, what the mind dwells on, the body acts on. And it becomes, we develop unhealthy and ungodly appetites by even having that discussion perhaps. Adultery is obviously condemned throughout the Bible. There's 3 chapters on that in the Levitical law. And there, the penalty for that was death, the death penalty. If you fool around on your marriage mate, you die. That was pretty strict. And yet some people did. And they ended up being stoned to death. But what a penalty and what a consequence for that kind of behavior. And people still did it. Rape is condemned in the Old Testament and the New. And in Deuteronomy 22 through 29, here we find about rape. Now, there was one thing, if a person is being raped out in the countryside and there's nobody to hear them, if they cried out and they don't cry out, then the woman could go free at that point, but the man could not. But if you're within hearing distance of folks and you didn't cry out, you both died. The death penalty. Pretty strict. Whoredom, that is selling yourself or trading yourself for something. And that is condemned over in these passages. Bestiality is on the rise as well. And bestiality is a human being with an animal having some sort of sexual pleasure. Sodomy or homosexuality, likewise condemned in the Old Testament. A non-virgin bride, you come to your wedding and you've been with somebody before that wedding, the death penalty is here for all of these. This was the law of Moses, and it was the death penalty if you have had sex before marriage. All of this falls in the Decalogue of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. We don't lust after someone else's mate. We don't go out here and overstep the boundaries of sexuality. Now, from all of that, I draw this conclusion, and that is that God has some very strong mandates about our sexuality. That sexuality, our sexuality belongs within very tight limits, strict boundaries, not to be expressed outside of those boundaries. That's the Old Testament. Now I come to the New Testament, and in the New Testament, I read that Jesus goes a little deeper on this. In Matthew chapter 5, 27 and following, And I say and following because we usually go verse 27. Whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. And what Jesus says is that it's not just the physical act, but it's the attitude of our heart that can put us in the category where that sin goes on our record, sin of adultery. And thus we have two avenues to go here. One is not presenting our bodies in such a way that they are objects of lust. And the other is not gawking at people and looking at people with the intent of lusting. Now, lest our time get away, I want to develop that section of verses just a little bit more. Don't look on a woman to lust after her. Whoever does has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Then I drop on down a few verses and I find about divorce and remarriage. And about 5-6 verses later, divorce and remarriage. Don't cheat in your marriage. If you commit adultery, then you can be put out of your marriage. Now, what's in between those two verses? You know what's in between there? If your eye offends you, pluck it out. If your hand offends you, cut it off. Now, what on earth is your eye and your hand doing in the middle of a sexual context? We don't have to guess very long to know what our eyes can do. We can look at things we ought not to look at, and what our hands can do. When it comes to pornography, it's very clear what your eyes and your hands do. That is, that we're looking at whatever's out here on the screen, or we may be out here at some kind of a strip club or some exotic situation, and our eyes are out of control. What did Jesus say to do if your eye offends you? He said, pluck it out. And I don't see many one-eyed or two-eyed or blind people today. I did see one this morning, but I don't think it had related to this. But yeah. So what he is teaching in the middle of a sexual context is if you can't control yourself, you'd be better to do without certain body parts. Well, that gets kind of serious. I don't know too many people want to do that. But yet he's saying you need to go to extremes to protect your mind. We may develop that a little further as we go. All right. Fornication is condemned throughout the scriptures, in the New Testament and the Old. Many passages on that. Adultery as well. Basically, the difference in fornication. Fornication is a very general term. Porneia is the term there. And it basically actually translates into pornography in English. But adultery is also condemned. In other words, stepping outside of your marriage. And I want to suggest on that that when couples get married, they make a vow. And sometimes we kind of maybe don't look too closely at those vows later on. But here's the vow. Something like, I promise to love, honor, and cherish you, and forsaking all others. Who's all? Does that include me? Keep myself for you and you alone until death shall separate us. Now, wait a minute. You and you alone. That's not you and me. That's not you in one room and I'm over here in another room doing sneaky stuff. I'm keeping myself for you. Now that matches with 1 Corinthians 7. And that is that in the marital relationship, the wife's body belongs to the husband and the husband's body belongs to the wife. That is, we have relinquished control. We have surrendered control of our body, our sexuality, and we've surrendered that when we are saying I do. And what that means is that solo sex is off the table. We're not out here to satisfy ourselves, that we are to look to the other as to how we might please or satisfy them. 1 Corinthians 7, about verse 33, 34. And Paul there talks about how in a marriage relationship that a man looks to his wife how he might please her, and likewise the wife how she might please her husband. We have far too many marriages today that are looking at how to break up the marriage than we do in some cases, at least, with people that are looking on how to cement that relationship together closer and to have that marriage bond. Many people are stepping outside of that. All right, let's keep going here. Lasciviousness. This is things that produce lust. And the New Testament certainly condemns that. Talks about those that are lascivious or act vulgar in their demeanor. They are enticing, maybe seductive, might be a better word for that. And then, I can't see the slide very well. All right, Galatians 5, it talks there about the works of the flesh, and among those are some sexual sins. And then a term that we don't use much in a proper context today. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 8, the writer makes an argument about how in the normal course of life, that in the family relationship, that we care for each other. And then he says this thing, else were you bastards. What's that mean? What he says is that God cares for us not like an illegitimate child where there's going to be some barriers, but God cares for us in a tender, nurturing way. And that argument doesn't mean anything if we're going to reduce this term to daddy, mama, and those kinds of things. That term that loses its power. But the writer there uses that and uses that in a context, it's a sexual context. Whoremongers is also a New Testament term. And then we have sodomy talked about. And I'm going to get my outline out because I can't read my own PowerPoint back there. All right, you can read it. Well, I guess I could do that. Flee fornication. Okay. Works two ways, huh? So flee fornication. Now, fleeing fornication means stay away from it. Stay away from the things that are going to titillate our mind, that are going to keep us in a maybe a sexual arousal kind of state. And what we're supposed to do is to flee that. Now, flee means run away. You saw a bear or a lion coming after you, and you probably wouldn't just stand there. You'd take off running, and you'd hope you'd make it to some safety. Well, that's what this word means. Flee fornication. And then he goes on that every sin a person does is without the body, but the one who commits fornication sins against his very soul. Your sexuality and your spirituality are tied together. And that verse is one that we would use to show that. All right. And then what we have is this passage I'm going to look at in a little detail. And that is, Paul says that we are to possess our vessel in honor. That's American Standard. And possessing your vessel in honor. Now, sometimes the Bible uses real nice language that maybe we don't quite drill down to get. But what he's telling you is that part of you, your vessel, what makes you a female, those parts that make you a female, and those parts that make you a male, that we are to possess our sexual organs in such a way that that's with honor. Possess your vessels in honor. And he says at the first of that, this is your sanctification. And we'll look at that verse in a little bit more detail. All right. Well, all of these verses give us the concept of how God views human sexuality. And these verses, while many of them, if not all, tend to be more negative and more of the don't verses, we get the picture of this, that God has protective barriers around our sexuality. And that if we're going to take those barriers down and just treat our sexuality in such a way that it degrades our bodies and degrades our relationship with God, then we've got a very serious problem with God. All right. Get playing here. What is the frequency of marital relationship? This is part of the problem with pornography. The fact is, it's a large part of the problem in many marriages. What is the frequency? I talk with couples, and I will ask this question because I talk very plainly with couples. If this is the problem, we're going to deal with it. And what they will tell me is maybe they've got some physical roadblocks. Others will use expressions like we've got here. 4 times a year, that's once every 3 months. Or one couple told me, well, at least once a year. Some said never. Some said every 6 months. Or one lady told me, well, on his birthday if he's been good all year. I guess that's the gift. Some are on the other extreme. One said 4 times a day. And then others had other periods of time. Here's the point I want to make. 1 Corinthians 7 talks about Satan tempting us through our incontinency. In other words, where we don't have a regular sex life in marriage, I'm talking about in marriage now, when we don't have that, Satan can tempt one or the other to be more sexually aroused and begin looking other places. And that's what that passage is talking about, is that Satan can tempt us. People can, in marriage, when they're used to being regular with one another, and then that stops happening, then there's a problem. I've had people that have told me that they had more relations before marriage than they did after. And that's bad both ways. All right. So when we look at frequency, all right, let's listen to God on this one. About giving ourselves to one another, and I'm talking about in the marriage relationship. Let me back up just a hair on that. Unfortunately, we live in a sex-saturated culture. And we have people that are giving themselves into sexual activity way before marriage. Not everybody. We've got some really good people out there and some very good people in the church as well. But when we open the door before it's time, when we awaken our sexuality before it's time, then there is no logical way to shut that door because of the memories and the thoughts that we put in our head. And so it will be a problem for us. If we say, okay, I did that, shouldn't have done that, not going to do that, but I know how to do that. And then it becomes a temptation in a very special way after that, when we've given ourselves before marriage. All right, let's see what God says. God talks about the works of the flesh, and he has fornication, adultery, lasciviousness in there. Those that practice such shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Romans 1, he talks here about those that are without natural affection, and he specifically says people who burn in their own lust one with another, men with men and women with women. He's talking about homosexuality. And then he says in that passage that God gave them up 3 times in the passage. Saddest statement I know of in the Bible, besides depart from me, and that is that God gave them up. A person can get so far out there, their mind gets so filled with filth, and their mind is on sexual stuff so regularly, you can get out there that Peter talks about those that have eyes full of adultery and cannot cease from sin. You see what he's saying? He's saying that they have built such barriers and their mind is so full that they cannot cease from sin. That doesn't mean they're not able to. That simply means that the direction of their mind, their thoughts are so polluted, so corrupted, that it's like living in the garbage dump. And that becomes the way of thinking. All right. We talked about looking to lust, eyes full of adultery. And then this passage in 2 Timothy, evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse. All right, look at that word seducers and also evil men. They wax worse and worse. And this tells us about the progressive nature of sexual perversion, of deviant behavior. The natural progression is it gets worse and worse. Just like we talked about last night with substance addictions, that a person starts chasing that high, looking for that more intense relationship or more intense relationship with the drug. In this case, the relationship is with our own chemistry. And notice it says worse and worse. Here's where I go with that. What starts on the screen will not stop on the screen. Once our mind gets in, we get the channels of our mind going in those directions, then it's going to be very easy for our mind to stay there and to want to go a little further, a little further, a little further. And here's what that looks like. People express themselves in pornography. So they go out and do whatever they do with the pornography. But then something pops up on the screen and says, hey, I'm right down the street, give me a call or let me know if you're available. And so we can hook up through these websites. Other people come in here and there's new websites go up every. The fact is, I believe the last number I saw was something like 600 new websites, new pornographic websites a week. That's a lot. That's actually the number one reason most folks go to their computers and to their digital devices is for some kind of sexual thing. There are good ways to use them, but we'll talk about that in the morning. But evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, so that it is very progressive. What starts on the screen doesn't stop there. Then it gets into chats and connections, and it may end up with strip clubs or with escorts or whole realm of that takes us into a very, very dangerous and perverted world. That happens. And that verse tells us about that. It doesn't get better. We don't stop where we are. It will be progressive once it starts. And then Peter talked about those that entice unsteadfast souls. Now, these are all verses that we can use when we talk with people about the nature of this pornography. Job said, I've made a covenant with my eyes not to look upon a maiden. In the realm of how we perceive things, what is taken in through the eyes is raw information. And that comes in through the eyes, and then it filters through the brain, and then we come out with conclusion. It's not the same with ears. Our ears have more of a filter system to them. And when we hear something, we can either blow it off, accept it, or do something with it. But the eyes give us raw data. And once we've seen something, that's hard to get out of our mind. So when we are sitting in front of some device and we're letting raw information come into our head, the mind's going to try to do something with that information. It's going to try to catalog it some way. And unfortunately, in that catalog, it is there to be pulled back up at any point we want to go back there and think about that. That becomes a problem in marriage. It is a problem. But it becomes a problem now when marital couple go in the bedroom and what's flashing through somebody's mind is other stuff they've seen. I can't tell you the number of people that tell me, when we're in bed together, I just feel like there's somebody else in bed with us. And when they tell me this story, it's like, yeah, it probably is. Very much is. And that person's in your husband's head or in your wife's head because she stuck stuff in her head that now she or he's having trouble getting out of their head. And it interferes with the relationship. And make no mistake about it, that there is a sixth sense that we can tell when something's not quite right, but we don't know what it is. It'll interfere with your intimacy, your sex life. All right. Patrick Carnes was one of the pioneers in this. Others would be Mark Lacer up in Minnesota. He's deceased now, as I think is Patrick Carnes. But these are two pioneers. They were both preachers and not gospel preachers. But they got caught up in this a long time ago, right kind of at the first of it. And they worked their way out of it. And as a result, they felt, and I thank them that they felt it would be helpful to come out of the darkness on this and to tell people about their journey and how to take this journey to get past this stuff. And they've got a number of things, a lot of materials, Out of the Darkness, Beyond the Darkness. Patrick Carnes and Mark Lacer both have clinics, and I've actually sent several people that just way out there, sent them to these clinics. And the one down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, with Carnes is an inpatient unit to deal strictly with all this stuff. And the one up in Minnesota is a day program, but both of those are extensive. and both of them have tracks for the wife and for the husband. Sometimes this is so extreme and that we have to go to that measure. You need to go away a while and get your thinking straight. You need to focus on getting your thinking straight, because once or twice a week talking to me or to somebody else just isn't getting it. So more intense. All right. In this, they list several types of sexual, internet sexual issues. I'm not going to go into all of those, but here they are for you if you want to talk with me further about that. All right. And remember, evil men and seducers wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. White slavery is on the rise. Children are being abducted for sexual purposes. The average one survives about 3 years. Traded all over the place. Sold. Yeah. Watch your kids, families. All right. So here's some of the criteria we look for if we're trying to figure out, does a person have a pornography problem? In other words, they spend long hours at the computer. Secretive kinds of stuff. Where they don't want you to look at where they've been. So they're trying to hide their history or trying to keep you from seeing what they're looking at. Maybe they've got special sites, or maybe they've got special phones that they use just for that. All right, we'll see a person when they've gotten caught or are about to get caught. We see them getting real irritable, real defensive, especially around their electronic devices. They may, in fact, be more sexual in their marriage relationship. Often that's driven by guilt over cheating. But sometimes they're less so, because sexuality for the male is about supply and demand. If the supply is expended during the pornography, then there's not as much supply, and therefore the male may not be as interested in his wife. Yep. Is that clear enough? You understand it? Okay. All right. I'm aware we've got mixed audience here. All right. Committing illegal acts. Recovery groups. SAA, Sex Addicts Anonymous, is one of those recovery groups. It's actually a pretty good group, with the exception that they're talking in those groups about any form of sexuality, which would include homosexuality. And I'm not an advocate of that. But in their meetings, they have 4 different levels, which shows you again that progressiveness. In the 4 levels, we start out with we start out with the pornography and the obsessions, and then it goes deeper to where ultimately the 4th level is about illegal stuff, snuff stuff. I'm not talking about tobacco snuff. I'm talking about people that get excited by choking somebody out or maybe even killing them. That's pretty illegal. All right. Or pedophilia. By the way, folks, pedophilia is on the rise. And the last year or so, I've run into it more times than I even care to have a conversation about among church members. Pedophilia. Some sick people out there. Okay, committing illegal acts online. Jeopardizing or losing relationships. Here's someone that they're with a company that's got a zero tolerance policy, and they still go in here and click on these sites, and then one day the IT person turns them in, and they get called in, and I'll tell you what, the lies people make are quite interesting. Quite unbelievable a lot of times. All right, so there are a lot of myths about pornography. Actually, you might be surprised to know that pornography is not listed as a mental health or addiction disorder. When someone comes to me for this and they want to run through their insurance, I code it as obsessive compulsive disorder because that's what it is. But there is no, it's not considered to be a mental health or an addiction issue yet. The new manual that's coming out will list it that way, but it's not there yet. Now, with that in mind, you go to a lot of therapists and you say, well, I've got a problem with chronic self-stimulation. I'm going to use a different word there. You know what the other word is. All right, so I've got a problem with this. And some people say, well, that's natural. That's what everybody does. You know, men and women. You know, if you don't have a partner, you take care of it yourself. Don't go to that therapist. That therapist isn't telling you what the Bible says, and they're not operating from your framework of your standards. That's way out there. But they will try to justify it and make your head feel better. Not all will do that. As a matter of fact, let me say this. Many therapists are extremely humanistic and worldly, but not all of them are that way. Fact is, most of the ones I run into have pretty much of a fundamentalist, Bible-believing, you need to serve God mentality, whether they're members of the church or not, as we use the terms. Well, so with those folks, they're going to tell me something. They're going to tell me something that maybe is worth listening to. Now, with that in mind, if you pick a therapist, you need to pick somebody. You need to interview them. Or if you're picking one for somebody, you need to interview them a little bit. Where do you come from when you talk to people? What's your framework? When congregations are looking for someone they can refer to in the area, what you want to do is to talk with those people, get to know them. And more often than not, what you want to do is to see if you can be partners in the counseling relationship by signing a two-way release of information. What that means is you can tell them what you know, and they can tell you what they know, and that can be limited. It can be a limited release of information. But we'll talk more about that when we talk with the leadership this afternoon. People say, well, this isn't so bad. Doesn't hurt anybody. Doesn't even hurt me. Fact is, it makes me feel better. And when we talk to people that go to pornography or sexual stimulation, then we ask them, why do you do that? Now, that seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? But it's not. What we will find is some go there for sexual gratification. Sexual gratification is a part of it, generally across the board, but it's not all of it. People sometimes get angry. Maybe they're angry at their mate, and so they're viewing going to porn and all that. I'm angry. I'm honked off at her. I'll go look at somebody else. Sometimes people go there because they're stressed out. They've had a rough day at work, or something's not going right in their life, and they will go to the pornography for that. Sometimes people are bored. There's a number of reasons, but here's why that happens. It's because the self-soothing stuff that comes with self-manipulation, that self-soothing releases things into the system that are very much calming and will put a person in a state of relaxation. And that's why they go there. That's also why they surf, because they will ride that pre-orgasmic high, and they know as soon as they have release that it'll be over. So they out here just surfing, going to variety and all that. But in the process, they're doing something to themselves. They're rewiring their brain, and they're training themselves. They're training their body chemistry, their channels in their brain, to where we need variety in order to have release. That's what surfing does. Variety, one to the other, oh, wow, this one's, whatever. And with that variety, now we've trained ourselves not to be satisfied with one. Isn't that what God wants? One man for one woman for life? But we've trained our brain not to be satisfied with that. We've trained our brain to kind of go through the catalog and back and Okay, hey, I'm there. Let's end this. That's a problem. And when we've manipulated our brain to be that way, we've got some pretty significant issues that are going to take a long time to overcome, because those things will continue to rise to the front because we've trained our mind to think that way. If we can train our mind to think that way, we can also train it to unthink that way. And as time allows, I'll go into that a little bit. But people use a lot of excuses. Has no consequences. It's just a game. I'm just out there because I'm curious. Okay. Viewing pornography releases the same chemicals into your brain that heroin and cocaine do. It's one of the studies. In other words, that's where that intense high comes from. Unless our time gets too far away from us, during the sexual acts with self, or during the sexual acts, period, that the mind releases, our body releases chemicals. One of those is called phenethylamine, otherwise abbreviated as PEA. And phenethylamine is one of your bonding hormones. That is released in the brain. By the way, your brain is your largest sex organ, male and female. If it doesn't happen in the brain, it's not going to happen. So when we release this phenethylamine, it is the bonding chemical. It is that which gives us that connection, kind of like we belong to each other. And that's where possessiveness and all that in the extreme come in. All right. Now, if I'm releasing that chemical with a picture, I'm getting bonded to the picture or to the fantasy. If I'm releasing that with somebody that I have no right to, then I'm bonded to that person. And that's where that possessiveness, and even where a lot of murders come in. You got somebody else's person. And that phenethylamine is the bonding thing. Now, when we add oxytocin to that, now we've really got some stuff going. And that is, we belong to each other. We belong together. I can't have this feeling without you. So to the degree that we, in marriage, don't have regular relations, to that degree, that bonding starts to break. To the degree we have that outside of marriage, that bonding starts solidifying. But if I have learned to bond with a variety of people through the surfing or through multiple partners, now I'm glued to variety. You see what I'm talking about here? And that's what we have to break when we are talking with people about these verses. God said, when we go outside of God's boundaries, there's all kinds of issues out here. No wonder God said, basically, one man for one woman for life. No wonder God said, flee fornication, that sin is your sin against your own body. How? Because you've created an appetite that cannot legitimately be satisfied, except in the ways God said. But once you've had many, it's a little difficult for some to get used to one. All right. Well, this is where the addiction comes, is on statements like that. All right. I'm going to fly through some of this. Here's the addiction cycle. It is like being stuck in a revolving door. I'm going to talk about marital relations right now. And, well, this is true outside of that as well. But it's cyclical, and it's very predictable. That here's a person starts at the top of the cycle, and what they experience is, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm gonna fly right. I'm over this. And so we get going in life, and now we're having cravings. Sexual tension begins to build in our system. I can go way over here. I don't have to back off and fall on the floor. All right. All right. And then we get visual triggers. Now, I want to tell you what. It's been a while since I saw anybody in skimpy clothes, but I saw one yesterday. And it's like, what on earth is she doing dressed like that? You know, especially this time of the year. Y'all were with us. I said something about it. But many people want to just dress suggestive and provocative. Well, when we see that visual, and sometimes guys and women, sometimes those come out of nowhere. Talked with a guy last week that they had gone on something for spring break, and they were minding their business, walking along as a family, having a good time, enjoying their vacation, and out walks a hoochie mama. You've seen those. And she walks and she gets right in front of them. And they're on this kind of a boardwalk heading this way. And you can't turn around and go against your traffic. And so she's right there in front of them. And the guy's telling me, he said, you know, I really had a problem. I thought I had this conquered, but she was right there. Okay. That's this phase, the visual trigger. And then it's like, I can't think that. So now we start this battle. I've got to fight one. And then it's like, but what if? There's your fantasy. And then looking for the opportunity. That's the looking to lust. And if I had the opportunity, I'd do something with her or him. And then connecting and so forth. And up at the top of here, we have the letdown, which basically means a person goes into the self-loathing. I hate myself for doing this. Sometimes it's like, I didn't realize what I was missing. And we start feeding this appetite to go different directions. Well, all right. And then a person trying to do right, then at the end of this cycle, making a promise, I'm not going to do this anymore. But I don't know what to do. Do I tell my mate? Do I share with my mate that I'm over here in a dark room by myself, satisfying myself? Do I share that with my mate? Do I not share it? What do I do? Let me go there a second. Some of the therapies will teach full self-disclosure as a part of healing. In other words, they would tie it to confessing our faults one to another. And the question comes up in recovery stuff, how much do we need to disclose? For some, they want to know everything. What have you been doing? For others, it's like, I don't want to know. I don't want those images in my mind. You know, you cheated, that's all I need to know. I'm kind of out on that in terms of, I think sometimes that can be helpful, but I think sometimes it can do an awful lot of damage. Especially if the person tends to be a visual thinker, because their mind will try to bring closure and to imagine, what did they do? What was that like for them? And then ruminating and it makes the damage worse. But what I do recommend is that once we have this cycle going, to break the cycle, now hear me clearly, to break the cycle, sometimes we need to cease the sexual contact with each other. I have put people on a 90-day no sex contract, married people. And I go there from 1 Corinthians 7 about separating for a season to give yourself to fasting and prayer. It's not just do without for 90 days, but during that time, you need to be focused on getting your system reset. Now, here's what's happened. Remember I talked about how the body works on supply and demand? Well, with this supply and demand, if we've got this demand there and the supply is building up, all right, what happens when the demand diminishes, the supply is still there, and what do we do during this time? So what we do is we let the body reset. Can a person, by the way, nobody's ever had on their death certificate, they died for lack of sex. That's not on a death certificate. If anybody finds one, please forward that to me. I want to see that. They died because they didn't have enough sex. Some guys will make you think that, women. But anyway, we won't go there. Okay. But our body is made in such a way that we don't have to expend ourselves. Actually, what happens is the body starts absorbing its own. If they're not used, they're absorbed in the system and released. During those 90 days, you know what I find out? I find out people talk about things that they should have talked about before they got married. So I go back there with them. It's like, well, how come you all don't know each other? You don't know what makes each other tick. And the reason they often goes back to the way they started. Now, young people, this piece is for you. And that is, when you're in courtship relationship, dating is not about seeing how much we can turn each other on. Dating is about seeing if there is a match here, if there is some compatibility, if we enjoy being together, not just if we enjoy mashing our bodies together. It is about getting to know the person. And I say it this way, it is about getting to know the person intimately. I didn't say sexually, I said intimately. 960 times in the Old Testament, there is a word used. It's the word yada, and I may not be saying that right, Y-A-D-A. But that word is the word for intimacy. And all but 60 of those 960 times, it's used about your relationship with God. Now, that's not sexual. But it's about a closeness with God, a closeness that is so strong that we call it fellowship or a union with God, or we talk about Bible characters who walked with God and called a friend to God, got so close to God. That's that intimacy we're talking about, and that is what dating, or an object of dating one another, can and perhaps should be as it develops. And then the sexual stuff comes on the other side of marriage, on the other side of the marriage vow. After you get married, that's where the sexual piece kicks in. But before that, you know each other intimately. You kind of predict each other. I know what you like and what you don't like. Now when I go to 1 Corinthians 7, and I learn that I'm supposed to look to the ways of my wife, how I might please her, and she looks how she can please me. We already know each other, so we already know a lot of where those things are. And also we know some things, places that are not real good to go unless you want to fuss. You know each other. Well, I don't know how I got off on that, but I did. All right. Sometimes the addicted person is ambivalent. About 2 minutes here. All right. What do we do with the porn addict? I want to suggest first that in recovery, that what is done in secret needs to come to the light. Most folks do not overcome pornography by themselves. They have periods of time that they can bring it under control. But their best thinking will ultimately take them off and on back to these patterns. So what they need is not to be relying on their own thinking. They need to have a network of people that can help them through this, people they can talk to when they're having struggles, when they're having temptation, when it's a rough day, when I'm going through some stuff in my life, and my go-to for my placebo to calm my mind, my go-to for my self-soothing is not a bottle of beer or not some chemical, but it is my own chemical. And I go there and I can be satisfied with self-soothing. When my mind starts going there, we call it stinking thinking, but when our mind starts going there, then that's when we need someone that we can call. Now, I'm going to sound commercial here, but I don't mean to. I'll tell you where an option is for you. We've got a variety. When I say we, I'm talking about the leaving the pit behind. We have a place with a variety of men from Christian men around the country that they have Zoom meetings regularly, and they each have each other's phone number, and they call each other and say, hey, I'm having a rough time today. I had one call me at 7 this morning. Having a rough time today. It takes about 20 minutes, and we kind of shift and get on with our day. But these are Christian men who are saying we all have a common problem and we all want to help each other. When I'm strong and you're weak, I'll help you, vice versa. And those numbers, I can put anyone that is interested in connecting with that network, I can put you in touch with that. Several of them have given me permission to share their number. I don't share them on my slides, but I can connect you. There's a group for the women too, and we'll talk about that in just -1 minute because I'm over. I'll talk more about recovery in the next section, but this is a very serious problem, and it's not going to go away. Once we open the Pandora's box, it's open. Now, there's things we can do about it, and we'll talk about that on the recovery section in a minute. Okay, Ben?